Is Pakistan switching exclusively to Islamic banking?
Well, yes, Pakistan is switching exclusively to interest-free banking, as the finance minister said earlier this week.
Alright, why now?
Well, earlier this year in April, the Federal Shariat Court issued a ruling asking the government to completely get rid of interest in the banking system. And this case has been going on for more than 2 decades, actually 3 decades this year. So the government has decided now to implement the Federal Shariat Court's decision and shift the entire system to Islamic banking.
Who does this benefit?
There are different opinions on it. If you think about commercial banks or the banking sector in general, they're okay with either because they do make a profit in Islamic banking. Islamic banking doesn't mean that they don't earn anything. If you get rid of interest, there is something collateral for them to earn from, which is assets. So it benefits perhaps the government because they want to appease the religious lobby, the religious vote bank.
What does the average bank executive have to say about this?
Well, the bankers are confused right now, and that's because one of the biggest problems in shifting to a completely interest-free system or an Islamic banking system is that the government is the biggest borrower right now from local banks. Now, why this is a problem is because, like I mentioned earlier, in Islamic banking, when you borrow, you give partial ownership of one of your assets to the lender, which will be the banks in this case. And if the government is the biggest borrower, what this means is that the government will have to pledge some of its assets against the borrowing that it does. Now, the government only has limited assets. You know, how many state-owned enterprises are there? So what is the government going to do? They're going to pledge the highways, airports, toll plazas. I mean, there's a lot of confusion on how the government is going to borrow from these local banks in an Islamic system.
How soon will this system be implemented, if it is?
It's anybody's guess right now. I mean, we've been trying to grow Islamic banking for decades now, and right now Islamic banking's share in the banking industry is around 20%. So depending on how fast conventional banks transition to Islamic banks will determine the overall time for this change. Currently, one example I can give you is Faisal Bank, which has been trying to shift to Islamic banking for more than 5 years now, and it's a mid-sized banks. So your bigger banks, perhaps like HPL or UBL, how long is it going to take them to transition completely to Islamic banking? And it's anybody's guess essentially.
Assuming that this actually does happen, what will happen to my existing bank loan? Will I stop paying interest on it?
Well, that's one of the reasons why it's taking a long time. So banks will have to come up with an alternative arrangement for loans that are already existing, the contracts that have already been signed. So some alternative profit sharing arrangement will have to be, profit and loss sharing arrangement will have to be implemented. Because it's like I mentioned earlier, in Islamic banking, interest is banned, but you have to back your loans with an asset, and you have to come up with a profit and loss sharing arrangement. So all these mechanisms will have to be implemented and decided before a complete shift can happen. Well, IMF loans or IMF bailout.
Let me frame that again. Would this mean interest-free loans from the IMF as well?
That's a gray area right now because international institutions do offer Islamic loans, but IMF so far does not. So if you look at the Federal Shariat Court judgment in detail, it says that Pakistan's existing obligations will have to be honored. That means the loans that we've already taken from IMF, we'll be repaying them and we'll be paying interest on them. But it says future borrowing will have to be Sharia compliant. What this means is in the future, we cannot go to IMF and get a bailout like we've done in the past.